So hello everyone. Thank you for joining our LinkedIn Live today. My name's Hayley Roberts and I'm the VP of Marketing at Global Talent Hub. And today we're going to be discussing why the convergence of business and HR strategy is key for long-term success. Now, this topic has taken inspiration from a research report released earlier this month by Rundstedt Germany. But we'll be looking to explore whether the insights captured in the report reflect wider trends across Europe as a whole. And we'll discuss the key takeaways for business leaders as well. So before we get started, I'd like to ask our experts to introduce themselves. Sophia, as the author of the report, would you like to go first?
You're on mute as well, Sophia.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. So I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for the introduction, Hayley. My name is Sophia von Rundstedt. I'm the CEO of von Rundstedt and Partner in Germany and in the DACH region. We are about 300 employees and consultants and have 15 offices in Germany. We are working on promoting workforce transformation as a concept for the last couple of years, and I'm very excited that we are able to present our research report now and have the discussion here on LinkedIn Live today with our fellow experts and colleagues from the Global Talent Hub.
Great, thank you so much, Sophia. Ollie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Olivier Landerer. I'm the CEO of Global Talent Hub. We effectively are an organization that focuses on workforce transformation and outplacement services across Europe, but also the world as well. So very, very pleased to be here and very pleased to be with the esteemed panel.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Yes, Michael Moran, Chief Executive of 1080, based in the UK. We have now, for the past 12 years, been working with organisations both inside and outside, helping them redeploy, transform their workforces. Thank you, Hayley.
Thanks, Michael. And Dominic.
Yeah, very pleased to be here as well. Dominic Baumann. I'm with von Rundstedt, Switzerland. I'm a member of our management team, and I'm heading our consulting offering, which is not only focusing on small and mid-sized enterprises, which is what you see in my title. I'm heading our SME desk, but also other customers, larger customers, where we support companies in some of the topics we're going to discuss today.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so shall we just kick off with our first question? I think, which is the definition of workforce transformation. We're going to be talking a lot about this over the next 30 minutes or so. So let's set the stage, so to speak. I'm going to come to you first again, Sophia. Could you walk us through this, perhaps?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, to me or to us, workforce transformation is something that is in a way opposed to restructuring. So it's not about it's not about short term, it's about long term, it's about a transformation. So we're not acting on a crisis, but we are acting with a long-term transformation to implement our future strategy. And that means that we need to plan strategically about what we need, what kind of workforce we need in the future to implement our strategy and stay compatible in the marketplace. We have to be aware of what the future skills are that we need in our workforce. We have to understand what skills do we have today and how big are the gaps. And how do we close the gaps in the next couple of years by upskilling and reskilling, or also recruiting? Different measures we need to take. But since it is a transformation, it can take a couple of years, and we need that time to go about this strategically. And it means to have the right people in the right place at the right time to be successful for our businesses. But if you would like to add to that, Olivier and Dominic, please go ahead, and Michael.
Yeah, I think one additional thing, as you quite rightly said, I think it's looking really at the skills and the competencies, and those frameworks within organizations, and more importantly, as you rightly said, to have the right people in the right place at the right time is also to have the right skills, the right competencies at the right time as well, to make sure that organization moves effectively into their future state. So it's looking at the as is versus the to be, and I think those are the two criteria I think that I would take as workforce transformation. But over to Michael and Dominic.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add one thing. It is obviously right people, right skills at the right time. But for an organisation, in terms of business strategy, it's also at the right price. And if I bring you a sporting analogy, there's a very famous Canadian ice hockey player called Wayne Gretzky. And when asked the secret of his success, he said he skated to where the puck is going. He skated to where the puck is going. And so this is why it's a hot topic for organizations, because organizations have got to know where the puck is going, i.e. what are those future skills they're going to require, and then how do they get to that place? So I echo what Sophia says. This isn't an immediate fix. This is a much longer term project. And for organizations to think long term, but it's quite high risk, because if you don't get it right, if you haven't got the right skills, or your strategy changes and you need a new set of skills, it can be very debilitating for the business. Dominic.
Maybe just one additional thought. I mean, this is just as much an internal topic where you look at what you have and where you'd like to go, but it's also something that you need to look at in the context of the demographical change, of the technological change your company is just exposed to. And I think the report points that out very nicely as two of the key drivers, which make this even harder than just doing the internal analysis and your strategic planning.
If I can add one more aspect,
yeah, absolutely.
We talk about sustainability all of the time. And to me, this has a lot to do with sustainability of the workforce. So it's not short term, it's actually long term. It's what do I need in the future? And if I go about this with, a strategic workforce planning, I may not have to lay off anyone, because I have enough time to build up the skills that I need. Of course, I know this is very idealistic, but in a nutshell, that's what it boils down to. It's sustainability. So I wanted to add that. It's very important for me.
Okay. Did anyone else want to add anything else on the definition there? No? Okay. Well, that's great. I think let's just move straight on to our second question then. Let's assume the audience hasn't had an opportunity yet to read the report. Could you walk us through your top key takeaways for business leaders? Shall we start with Sophia again there?
Sure. Since we are the authors, it may be easier. But of course, Olivier came to our conference where we published it and introduced it last week. So please feel free to jump in and add some insights, and of course everybody else. So I think one of the numbers that I would like to utter here to distribute. 65% of the people we interviewed said that HR and the workforce will increase in importance in the future. And I think that's something that's, should make us very confident that we are looking at the right issues. 97% said that there already is a chronic shortage of talent, not everywhere, but in many, many areas. And at the same time, we see that in some areas, there is an excess. So, because we have digitalization, automatization, and artificial intelligence will not, of course, reinforce this effect even more. And I think it's very important, and that's what we heard from the people we interviewed here, that these things are happening at the same time, and it will be important to have an honest discussion. Where do we have a shortage, and where is an excess? and to understand what that means for talent strategy. One thing that we believe is great is that 81% actually said, we know what workforce transformation is, we understand the concept, we've heard about it, and 73% even said that they're already using it in their businesses. Also, when we asked about what is the greatest challenge in terms of workforce transformation, the answer was by 40% that the lack of flexibility of workers to adapt to the changes in the business was the greatest challenge. I think we will probably get to this during our discussion. And the final point I want to make, and this is really for me the major takeaway, 26% said that they already look at the interdependence of the business transformation and the workforce transformation. And I think this is something we really need to get into here, because it means that rather than the way we did it in the past, is that we define a strategy and then we look at what does that mean for the workforce, and do we need to lay off the personnel? It is interdependence means that there's an impact both ways. So if I want to innovate my business model and integrate technology or artificial intelligence, I need different skills. And maybe I need a different type of organization. So there's impact on the workforce. And on the other hand, if I find people that have future skills that are rare in the marketplace, they will have a very positive impact on the innovation of my business model. They will probably challenge my strategy and add new insights. So this goes both ways. And I think this is really the major aspect we found out.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Ollie, do you want to come in and add anything there?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think those were definitely on my list as well, Sophia. So I think you picked off on them as well. I think one of the bigger topics also that I noticed was the fact that there's a large proportion of people in the survey that said they're in that great position, they know, and they're already executing effectively on that. But what I found interesting as an element, as a differentiator there, was that was the employers themselves that were talking about that. When you're talking about from lawyers and consulting firms, there was a big difference in terms of that number. So I think it was somewhere in the region of 65 or 60% where they said, hey, they're already in that transformation, they're already going through that, they're already driving that. And they know all about it. But actually, when it comes down to the crux, when looking at the lawyers and the consulting firms, actually only 8%, were actually probably driving those. So I think there's a disparity in that sense in terms of how mature and how far you're actually going in the workforce transformation, and what is your definition, effectively of workforce transformation, and how adaptable is your organization to go. And I think that key element, one key takeaway, is the adaptability of your employees to make those changes, because ultimately it's a whole circle. You have a very large stakeholder bench effectively that need to manage this. It's not just one individual or one area that needs to focus. And another key takeaway for me was that communication is absolutely one of the key drivers to making this a success. Because ultimately, without clear communication, it's not going to work. And I've seen it. And I'll give you some examples of one organization I was talking to recently, where they have been making an organizational transformation, but at the same time trying to do a cultural transformation. And when you're trying to do too many transformations at the same time, it doesn't work, because your workforce is just being pushed upon, and there's a big pushback against it. So it's how do you measure it and how do you do it? And to your point, Sophia, this is not a short-term game, even a medium-term game. It's a long-term game that one needs to focus on.
Thanks, Ollie. I mean, I think the key thing here, I think, is about building competitive advantage, right? Doing this right, doing this well, you're giving yourself a real competitive advantage in the marketplace for actually succeeding with your organization transformations. Dominic, do you have anything to add here?
No, I just would like to build on the point that you just made, because you will need that competitive advantage in the future. I can only look at the numbers for Switzerland, for example, where we expect around 1.3 million workers to leave the labor market by 2030, whereas we will only have around 850,000, depending a bit on what statistic you look at, to enter the labor market. So we're looking at a reduction of somewhere between 8 and 9% within the next 6 years. And if you look at the usual duration of a strategy cycle, if you look at the next 5-year strategy in a company, you will have to take this into account. And we very often hear from people we're talking to, well, technology will save it. And I'm just skeptical about this. There's enough data showing that technological transformations have, of course, led to the disappearance for some jobs, but it has also created other jobs. And if you're looking at the latest report from the McKinsey Global Institute, for example, they are predicting that just as many jobs as will be replaced by technology will be created on the other hand side. So we will run into a shortage in terms of the workforce. And so it's exactly what you said, Haley. You need to have a competitive advantage to succeed.
And Michael, do you have any comments to add?
Yeah, I'm going to be deliberately provocative, because I think
Excellent.
it requires a huge mind shift on the part of organisations and employees. And like Ollie, I was surprised that organisations were saying they were ready and practicing this speech, because I think the go-to behaviour of most organisations when faced by significant strategic change is downsize, get rid of people they no longer require, and B, go to the marketplace to get talent, to hire talent. So that's been the normal rationale of organisations. It's hire and fire, and I believe that I can always go to the marketplace and I can get the prerequisite skills to the price. As Dominic just said, what's driving this particular change is the fact that talent is much harder to get, or you have to pay a price for it. But it's not just with organisations, it's also with employees. What do most all employees do now when they think about their career? I'm suggesting they look externally as opposed to internally. Their ability to move within organisations is not good. Good organisations aren't good at internal redeployment. So the natural factor isn't, let's take the world's best HR database, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is there to help me get my job outside. And so both parties, I feel, have got to change. We've got to think much more this sort of longer term. How do we develop a workforce that's agile and adaptable and can therefore move as a business strategy? But equally, we need to be able to convince employees this is in their best interest. Looking internally as opposed to externally is going to help their career. And that does require a mindset change on both parties, I would suggest.
Yeah, I would like to add an example, because I completely agree with what you said. We are just doing a project within a large automotive company, a big corporation in Germany, and they do have the situation that they need to lay off, yes, but at the same time, they have a lot of vacancies they can't fill. And that's why we created something we call this a transformation unit, where people whose role will not be existing in the future move into this unit. And there we can look for opportunities inside the corporation, because in many cases there's no transparency, neither for executives that are trying to fill their vacancies, nor for employees who don't even know, with the skills I have or skills I could acquire within the next couple of years, what opportunities do I have in the organization? Where could I develop? I think this is something that we really need to work on. How do we create this transparency? It's not about, just offering upskilling and reskilling, but to make people understand, what is my individual perspective? What do I have to learn? And what is a future role that would open up for me?
I was actually talking to an organization recently where they're building in a full talent management where they're looking at not your next job, but the job after that. And I think that there's very few organizations in the world that do this effectively and probably efficiently. And I think that talent management, unfortunately, has always been focused on the top talent that you have within the organization, which might be your 5% or your 6%, whatever it may be. But actually, you need to take, and the report was quite categoric in saying you need to look at this holistically across your whole talent landscape. So it's not only looking at permanent employees you might have, but what are the use of your contractors and external suppliers, etc., and taking that as your complete and entire ecosystem. Because I think that that is really how you, as an organization, coming back to your point, how do you become, effectively competitive in the marketplace? It's having those levers you can pull when you need to pull them to be able to switch things on and switch things off as you go along. And that's why you have permanent staff as well as flexible labor. And I think that the combination of these two brings almost a total talent type approach towards organizations. And that is where organizations need to start focusing on, as opposed to just saying, well, we have a talent management program, we do our appraisals once a year. And, also when you take a look at the job categories they have and the skills, competencies they've built, they're old. They're very old. They've maybe built them 6-10 years ago, but they're out of date. So how do you keep these things up to date? And I think this is the drivers that people need to start thinking about.
Who do you think is driving those discussions then? Is that coming from the CEO or is that coming from CHRO? Who owns that discussion in a business?
It's a very interesting one, actually, because I think it depends on the evolution of the organization. What I've seen is that HR and CHROs don't always have the full power, necessarily on the whole of the talent management and talent development. Typically, that's resounding itself with managers and with business unit and business leaders. However, I think that I read a report recently where they were saying by 2030, what would a CHR look like? They need to be able to take over the whole of that talent management and talent development piece. So I think it sits in potentially multiple camps. It doesn't sit in just one camp today.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think we are working on creating more awareness with CEOs, how strategically relevant this issue is, and that it's not just an HR challenge, that it's actually, especially when you look at the interdependence that I mentioned, that it's something that really is important for the whole business.
I think it has become a CEO finance-driven initiative, because in driving business strategy, you really do need to have a good handle on resources you've got available, both capital and labour. Interestingly, we've seen a lot of now investment in HR systems in terms of trying to identify what we've got. But I think the problem with HR we've got, it's a very much a static model of what it was. Do we really know in terms of what people's aspirations are? Because that's critical to talent development. And the next generation of HR software has got to be much more clever around not only telling what we've got, but predicting what we're going to need and what people's aspirations are as to whether they want to learn that skill. And that comes back to your point, Sophia, about the flexibility in the workforce. Because you do need a mindset of people who want to learn and who want to develop, if we're going to take this model to its logical conclusion.
I think one thing I think it's also important is that the work of HR will change fundamentally in the future. And so you will also need a different skill set among your HR colleagues, and you need to invest in your HR team. We're often talking about the skills of everybody around HR and that HR should make it happen, but you also need to focus and invest into the people that will actually make it happen in your company later on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dominic. I think we're going to move on to the next question, just conscious of time, just to make sure that we have enough time for the third piece of this discussion. So we've got the final question. So we've mentioned the research was conducted in Germany. But do you think the report is representative of a wider European business landscape? How relevant is it outside of Germany? Who'd like to take this one first? I don't want to pick on Sophia again.
Happy to go first. No, I think it's absolutely representative, and it's an interesting situation, as Germany has a much more regulated environment than we have in Switzerland. But nevertheless, the findings of the study very much reflect of what we're seeing in Switzerland. Maybe driven a bit by other factors, or it's just the regulatory factor is weaker in Switzerland. I wouldn't say that the others don't exist in other countries. I think it's the urgency to look into the workforce transformation for CEOs and for companies comes, as I mentioned before, of course, from a demographic perspective, but also simply from an economic perspective. I think companies are realizing that it's just much more expensive to do what Michael outlined before, that you lay off some people and you get new people from the labor market, as long as you still can from somewhere else. We just recently received a request from a customer who strategically wants to invest in people above the age of 55. So it was not related to any outplacements or mobility programs. It was purely, we want to do an assessment with our colleagues above the age of 55, where they want to go, what their priorities are, with the explicit goal to keep whether that's realistic or not, but to keep everybody within the company in the years until retirement. And I think this is something we haven't seen that clearly in the past. And so there is clearly something changing in this context also in Switzerland. And I would say this is just one example that underlines the findings of the report from Switzerland.
Thank you, Dominic. Michael, what about from a UK perspective?
I agree with Dominic. I mean, our regulatory framework is significantly less than our European partners, although with the recently elected Labour government, they are going to significantly change employee rights. Like Switzerland, we have terrible issues around talent shortages, and not helped by the Brexit thing. So we've definitely got that same demographic issue, which is making. So I do think it is representative. I would like to say also, I think that there's a longer term view within businesses around this need to move from hire fire to create really agile workforces. And it's not just been driven by CHROs. I do think the next generation of CEOs and HOs, particularly in most industries now, are talent led. It's all about the IP of people. They're recognizing that people are the most important asset, and therefore it's not something to be discarded easily. Once you make that investment, hopefully in the longer term, you can reskill, you can redeploy people. So I think the report is very opposite to the UK situation at present.
Okay, thank you. Ollie?
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. I think that if you look at the European landscape and obviously Global Talent Hub is not touching just one country, but touching multiple countries. What we see is that a lot of organizations are struggling, I would say, with this topic in particular, because they have to become more competitive. The landscape or the economic situation in a lot of countries is not favorable at the moment, and it's quite difficult, which has an ultimate impact on whether it's import or export. You have a lot of competition, even if you look at countries that have been really growing, like China, etc. They're also struggling now. Huh? There's also an impact there. So what you see is actually from a global perspective, this is not just siloed in one country. I think it's actually a global phenomenon. So if you take Europe, it goes even beyond that. And I think that one of the key elements, I think, is how do you take a strategy that you've developed from the top of an organization and effectively execute that across your organization. Yeah. And again, you hear topics about restructuring. That's a very short-term mechanism to be able to save costs, et cetera, et cetera. But what you then see is 6-12 months later, they want to start hiring some of those people back again, or those skill sets that they had, they wanted, and you're thinking you just wasted effectively. And I think to Sophia's point, and all our points actually, if you invest in your employees today and you look at what you have, you look at where you're going, and you start looking at how you can develop talents, and not just develop talents from a basic perspective, but actually, what are they willing to do? What would they like to do? What are the things that they enjoy doing? So actually getting under the crux of everything. And that also takes not only the individuals as the employees, but also the managers. And there's a whole form of training that goes on as well with all that. And I think it's a whole ecosystem. So I think it's a very holistic approach that we need to take on this particular topic, and it's wide and vast, but it definitely applies not only to Europe but globally.
I think one very important fact is what you just addressed, is people's motivation. It's not enough to have a system where you have, enter all the skills that everybody has, and then match them with some job offering, because just by matching some data, people are not going to move. So they have to understand what's in it for me. And especially when I've already seen a lot of things and I'm, end of my 50s or early 60s, but people can still, if they have the right challenge and they're motivated, they can still learn something, they can still contribute to the talent marketplace. And I think we have to help organizations and leaders to engage people and to motivate, and that of course has a lot to do with communication, but it also has a lot to do with showing perspective, giving perspective. So what's in it for you if you learn this and that? What's in it for you? What options are there for you in the future? We have, since we just touched upon that, people that are actually have already reached the retirement age. One of the corporations here in Germany, I'm not really sure, I think it was Bayer, they founded a new company where people that had already retired from Bayer, they were no longer on the payroll, they were kind of hired back in this new company to work as a consultant or contribute again, because they realized that they had lost so much know-how and network. And of course, our regulated job market here also forces companies to find new solutions, because just sending everybody to retirement at age 57 because you need to lay off is, of course, not the solution for the future. I think that's maybe why we are already experimenting with transformation units and things like that.
Very interesting to see, Sophia. We see similar patterns in Switzerland. One of the large technology companies in Switzerland has done exactly the same. They founded an own company offering interim management, but just for themselves. And it's going to be interesting to see whether these are somewhat closed ecosystems within these companies, or whether that becomes a more open market at some point. I think transferable management skills are not just applicable to the one employer that you've been before.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that really nicely kind of sums up what we wanted to cover today. So thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions coming from LinkedIn. So unless anyone has any other comments just to add on the European perspective, we can jump over to the questions. Okay, so the first one is from Tanya. And she asks, how do you think the design industry will evolve in terms of recruiting talent with AI expertise? Would anyone like to offer a thought on this one?
Good question.
It's a really good question.
It's a good
I
question.
don't know so much about the
Okay.
design industry, actually.
Okay. Well, what
I think-
about business as a whole, rather than specifically for the
Well,
design
I was going to say,
industry?
I don't think it's just a design industry problem. I think it's a industry-wide AI expertise at the moment is in very short supply. By the way, another reason why it's driving workforce transformation, because if you can't go outside and hire it, and you can't, you've got to develop it from within. Now, the question is how you do that. And I return to my point early on about where the puck is going. You're trying to forecast which skills or which AI-driven skills are going to be necessary for the future. And you are thinking 3 to 5 years ahead. So there is no easy answer to that question. But what I can tell you, it's absolutely going to drive transformation and recruitment practices, because there will still be people fighting over those short skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of new job profiles developing involving AI competencies, and it's relevant for every industry. I completely agree.
I recently spoke to the CEO of a marketing agency, one of the bigger ones in Switzerland, and he told me, of course, they're using AI to fast prototype certain designs and creative elements, but it's not at a point where they can completely rely on this. So there will still be the same hard skills required than today, but just the process has changed. And of course, you need people who know how to use these AI tools and to make the best use of the tools available and develop them further in the future. So I think it's the need is changing, but there's also this famous saying of saying AI is not taking your job. A person that knows how to use AI will, and I think this specifically also applies to this industry.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I think that, again, realizing that actually it's a tool, just like in the old days, you might have been using a computer-aided design system, to be able to drive certain topics, whereas before you were hand drawing things, so it became more evolving. I think we're going through those stages, and I think AI is just an addition to that, in the sense that it's moving in that direction. And obviously it has an intelligence piece to it as well. So it's also enabling you to have other elements coming into flow. But it's actually enriching. I think it will enrich, the experience, and should enrich, hopefully, potentially that industry as well, or any industry.
We do have a couple of questions, so I am going to just jump to the next one, if that's okay. We've got a question from Guillaume. And he asks, implementing a skills management mindset and related technology currently is at the top of many CHRO's priorities. How can organizations best approach this transformation?
Well, I think we already said that it's about technology. Yes, if your corporation has a certain size, you will not get around data and technology to understand what skills you have. But at the same time, it's a lot about communicating, showing perspective, motivating people, mobilizing people, making sure people are. We discussed this earlier as a finding of the report that the lack of flexibility is a problem. It's at 40%. So this is about mindset. How do you create this mindset? And that's all about showing perspective. And also strengthening competencies by understanding what are the right upskilling or reskilling measures. But I think it's really a combination of these aspects. It's not just the technology.
Thank you, Sophia. We have.
If I just may add one point,
okay.
I mean, it's one thing to create enthusiasm around the topic at the beginning, but you also need to make sure to uphold this throughout the process and not to frustrate people. And one thing we have seen more than once is handing out empty Excel files to line managers and saying, now please fill the skills you have in your team. It's not going to work, and B, people are going to be frustrated with the process very quickly, and there's better ways to do this, depending, as Sophia said, a bit on the size of the organization. But you can certainly approach all of us also individually if you need advice for a specific situation.
Yeah, it needs to live, huh? It needs to live, doesn't it? No, sorry, Sophia. It needs to live. Yeah, so it needs to grow and live, and actually continually develop. It's not something that is static.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the things is that what we've seen with a lot of organizations is they have their skills mapped in their HRS systems. They have all this sort of thing, but ultimately they don't effectively extract that in a way to be able to use it in an effective manner. And I think this is where the living and breathing, effectively of this type of ecosystem is something that's highly important. Sorry, Sophia.
I just wanted to add the point that it's about, we say, put people in the driver's seat of their career. It is every individual responsibility to understand what is it that I know that I can contribute. What would I like to do in the future, and also maybe HR or even in the future artificial intelligence can add inspiration by making suggestions and things like that. But it's really up to me as an individual to reflect upon that and then come up with an idea where I want to go, what could be a next step, where is the future career goal that I want to reach.
I think your point there, Sophia, actually nicely links into one of our other questions. So I'm just going to take the opportunity to bring that one up now. So this is from Andrew. I think his profile hasn't pulled across here, but he asks, we're talking about skills and redistribution of resources, but what about burnout prevention and keeping employees happy to be driven, a work-life balance? People aren't just a commodity.
It's absolutely, isn't it? So, we're looking at people, we talk about resources. So good employers acknowledge that a whole series of motivations drive employees and drive engagement, and understanding them is critical. And work-life balance, making sure it's a healthy workplace, all go along. So it's not just looking at skills in isolation. It's also about looking at what's important to people, what motivates people. So absolutely, Andrew, absolutely agree.
Any other comments on that question?
I mean, I hope it didn't come across that we just talk about people as resources, because I think this is definitely not what we feel and what we discussed also in the pre-discussion of the session today. If we talk about skills, it's a lot about what do I want to do, what makes me happy, it's what Sophia also mentioned before, and I think that is very much linked to this question about burnout prevention and having whether it's a work-life balance or just in general a good balance in your life where work is an important part of it. I think that's it. What ultimately will keep your employees in the company. Otherwise, you're looking at a higher fluctuation again, and this is what we try to work against with a sustainable workforce transformation.
And I think organizations also need to take responsibility for caring for their employees. So I think it's, a lot of organizations, or a lot of what I've seen, actually have many factors put in place to make sure that, you're not just upskilling, reskilling, cutting the number of your workers, making people work double the number of hours they should do, and then you get to that whole burnout prevention or burnout situation. So I think that it's also about, how do you balance your workforce to have the right people in the right place at the right time, to make sure that you can effectively have those productivity levels that you want to gain as an organization, which effectively also affect your profits at the end of the day. So we do know that there's a fine line between the two. So it's how do you balance it? Huh?
Thanks, Ollie. I think that actually puts us at time for today. So thank you everyone for sending in questions. That was really a really great kind of debate at the end of the session here. So thank you very much. I do want to mention that we're going to be sharing the research report with anyone that would like a copy. You can request a copy in English or German if you email contact@globaltalenthub.eu. That's contact@globaltalenthub.eu, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of the report. Finally, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say a big thank you to the panel for sharing their insights today. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope we see you all again soon. Thanks. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.